little flap.
Step up what you want.
Might even slip a little bit.
Yeah.
God.
Dunk it.
Hey everyone, this is Liz Brassoff from Thrust Flight. I'm one of the chief flight instructors here, and today we're going to talk about the power off 180-degree approach and landing, one of my personal favorites.
All right, so we're going to come to you a power off 180-degree landing next. This is one of the precision landings you do in commercial.
Around 3.5 click on 170 gator.
And the goal is to fly the pattern normally so I can judge my sink rate so that my touchdown is on my specified point or within 200 feet beyond, but that you're not short. So we have a lot of people who equate this to like an emergency landing. In an emergency, I'm not going to worry about hitting my point within 200 feet. I'm hoping I got a little more cushion than that at the runway selected. But we will fly it with the power at idle and just kind of showing your mastery of judging the descent rate and glide path of your aircraft. Okay. I want to get set up for my traffic pattern just like normal. We're going to be at 1,000 feet above the ground here, 1,600. I want to be a good normal spacing on downwind. You could fly it a little bit closer if you knew you were battling a particularly strong headwind or something.
Now, one thing I like to tell my students, and sorry if I'm interrupting here.
No, please.
Keep a consistent pattern. If you do one pattern at 110 knots, you do your next one at 90. It's just one more variable that you got to calculate on your sink rate.
Our goal is to remove variables, not add them to it. So if I fly a consistent speed on downwind and I pull the power to idle to be my touchdown point as specified for a power off 180-degree landing, then I already know a really good starting position for my airplane where I can manage the energy from and be able to adapt to the wind and not have a lot of other added variables to contend with. So that's something that we mentioned a little bit, but not really in depth. The other note is we still have to perform the normal radio calls. We still have to perform the normal checklists as you would on any other type of landing. That's part of the airman certification standards for this landing is those normal procedures can't go out of the window just because you're going to fly it slightly different. So really where things start to change from a normal landing with this maneuver is right at the point where you're abeam your touchdown point. So in this case, I believe I use the runway numbers. So I'm looking when they're immediately off my wing, I'm in line with them on the downwind. That's when I'm going to pull power to idle, and from there you'll fly with power out the rest of the landing approach. That's, like I said, where really the big difference first comes between this and a normal landing.
One thing to kind of point out as you're doing this, Liz, the wind at altitude is 12 knots out of the southwest still, but on the ground they reported it at 4 knots. So it will change again from when you're in the pattern and when you're on the ground.
Yeah, all right. Landing light on, fuel pump on. Okay, so right there where it'd be my touchdown point, so I'm gonna pull throttle to idle. I'm gonna hold altitude here as I slow down to my best glide speed. I feel like that makes it a little bit more consistent for me as we come around. I already know what airspeed will be.
So the Airman Certification Standards doesn't specify which speed you have to fly this maneuver at. If you need to be slightly faster than your best glide speed because of the wind conditions or the altitude or the glide path of your aircraft's normal performance, then you can do that. In most training aircraft, best glide is an excellent place to start, but you can adjust it for your airplane. It just says that we need to be able to manage altitude and energy to obtain our specified landing point. It doesn't say that we have to fly at this marked airspeed in your airplane.
35387 downwind, we'll fly down.
Okay, there's 76, so we're gonna go ahead and make our turn to base.
Rock all traffic, 575, left base, 7, touchdown, rock all.
So I got a little slow, so I'm releasing some back pressure to speed up, but I don't want to overcorrect for it. Right here on base, it's another key position for me to check my...
Turn out at 3, clear the active up.
To check my descent rate as I'm looking at my landing point here. I feel pretty good. I don't think I want to come all the way out for a square turn on final, so I'm going to cut the turn a little early here.
So I mentioned I'm cutting the turn early from base to final as we fly this maneuver because I'm descending so quickly. That's one adjustment I can make to shorten basically the distance between myself and the runway is instead of making that 90-degree turn, I fly the diagonal distance, which shortens the time between me and the runway. Perhaps we're high and you do the opposite. You could add add distance or make sure you squared the turn from base to final to lose more altitude or not get too close to the runway before you've lost that altitude. So there's a lot of adjusting that needs to be done here. You're constantly evaluating your position from the runway based off of your descent rate and the adjustments you think you need to make it to your specified landing point. The standards are pretty strict on this maneuver. It says you'll touch down at your specified point or within 200 feet beyond. So I can't be short, it's -0, but that I've got a 200-foot cushion basically from that specified point, slight overage that I could use if needed. So we really have to be experts at judging how quickly we're coming down and what adjustments we need to make. So it takes some practice, but hopefully through the end of this video here, you'll see a few other adjustments we make to come down.
Please check.
I'm gonna put in the first notch flaps. I like where we're at. We've definitely got the runway made. I'm gonna put in second notch flaps and full flaps.
Step up what you want.
Might even slip a little bit.
Yeah. That away.
God.
Dunk it.
And I don't want to build a ton of airspeed in this slip. That's the whole point.
Great call out.
Dude, using altitude without building airspeed. Good, I've got 65 knots. Should turn out pretty good here.
All right, so I mentioned I chose the runway numbers for my specified touchdown point. And if you notice, our aircraft touched down on the first runway stripe or the first line after that point, after the runway numbers. That is within our commercial ACS standards. And you notice I mentioned the airspeed on short final. We did a slip because we still felt high. I'd put in all the flaps. That was enough to lose all the altitude we had. So we also applied a forward slip, lost some more altitude, and then I say we're at about 65 knots. This should work out good. We don't have much headwind today in this video, and so the aircraft still wanted to float as I removed the slip and aligned with the runway. So there's a slight compromise I make here on the touchdown. If you notice, it's not the world's nose highest landing. I have a fairly flat touchdown because I'm trying to manage that float or the flare time because I don't want to extend the distance that I go down the runway. That's an acceptable compromise. You have to make sure you touch down at the proper attitude, but there's some variation or some adjustments I can make there. So if my aircraft looks like it's going to be short of my landing point, I can hold the flare as long as possible, right? Bleed off all the airspeed and energy to try and make it to my point. If it looks like I'm going to float or flare slightly past it, then perhaps I'll accept a slightly flatter touchdown attitude. But like I said, the commercial ACS standards still state it has to be at the proper attitude. So we shouldn't 3-point the landing. It definitely can't be a nose wheel first landing here, like in a tricycle gear aircraft, but there is a small range there that the pilot can adjust, and then that's what we've applied here. The other note I want to mention is the forward slip. This is where I have a lot of commercial students require a little bit more practice or make some common errors. They think I need to lose altitude, so what should I do? Pitch down, right? And they push forward with a really big movement, and they've also applied a forward slip. The problem with that large pitch down motion is it builds a lot of airspeed. So ideally, when I perform this forward slip, I would be able to lose altitude without increasing airspeed at all. I would just maintain my airspeed. So I'm going to apply my rudder and aileron inputs, and then I will just manage with the elevator my airspeed so that it maintains a safe speed. It doesn't increase it. Like I said, normally we have tendency as pilots to push forward with that, or at least at the commercial level. Truly, it's a very small movement to maintain the airspeed forward, or perhaps as even just holding it at the horizon. So something to watch for, that you're not increasing airspeed. If I'm slipping, it's because I already had too much altitude. I don't want to build airspeed on top of it.
Take this size 25.
So a few other things to note there. The after landing needs to still be performed like a good landing would, if that makes sense. So I need to apply brakes, exit the runway, or get cleaned up for a takeoff configuration, depending on the instructions from my examiner. So you don't want to just focus all on the landing and then, whew, you let your hands off the controls and nothing else matters. We made the touchdown point. Again, another place where I see students put so much emphasis on the actual landing, we forget we're still flying an aircraft, right? So we want to make sure that you're either preparing for the next next exit or reconfiguring your aircraft for the takeoff on this. Let's talk a little bit about go-arounds for the power off 180-degree landing. There's different opinions from different examiners, so this is something you'd want to discuss with your flight instructor as they've sent candidates to the examiner you'll test with beforehand. In the Airman Certification Standards, it's fairly vague. It says that you should be able to plan and prepare for executing a go-around. Some examiners feel that it's not permitted on this maneuver, so something you'd want to be familiar with the examiner you're testing on and their philosophy. They'll probably brief you on it as well, or it's something that I could ask the examiner before we begin, hey, am I allowed to go around on this landing, or is it a one-shot, that's all I get? Like I said, a few different perspectives out there, so something you just want to clarify beforehand so you know the expectations. Well, that about wraps up today's video. We hope you enjoyed it, and if you've got any questions, leave us a comment, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos.